So I want to talk about probably one of the most common fears that every human has, which is the fear of vulnerability and rejection. And this fear, you may not connect with it right now, but if you start to do inquiry and feel in, eventually it's going to definitely come up. I mean, I've never really met anybody who who didn't have this, to be honest with you. And the fear of vulnerability can show up in many different ways, but it shows up in relationships and shows up in all relationships, really. Close relationships, just friends, I mean, family. The fear of vulnerability is very subtle and it's kind of taboo to even talk about. But essentially, if you feel into this and just see if your body responds to this sense of being vulnerable around other people. Like, am I okay with that? Being fully vulnerable around people. Maybe certain people, right? Maybe just close friends you could be vulnerable with, but not fully vulnerable, right? Is there anyone in your life that you're totally and 100% authentic with? Hopefully at least one person. But a lot of people don't even have that. But if you notice, though, how important that is, how important is it actually to be authentic? You know, we learn since we're kids, we learn how to hide, we learn how to protect ourselves. And we don't even realize that we're doing that because it feels so normal almost. Well, at least not at first. At first it feels kind of strange because when you're a child, you really feel everything and it's like, why are the adults all hiding? Why are people acting like this? But eventually you kind of just accept it and this is just the way it is. And I have to hide. But deep down, you don't really want to, right? You really don't want to hide and people please and wear a mask, right? But maybe you've been hurt before, like everyone, right? Everyone gets hurt to some degree in childhood. We just may not remember. We may not even think about that anymore. Or you may. You may think about it a lot. But when we're kids, we're very sensitive. And I would say as adults, there's really no difference between adults and kids, but adults just learn how to protect themselves and filter themselves and be an adult, you know, but there's still the same exact emotions underneath, though. So, really, we learn at a young age that it's not okay to be fully vulnerable. Because maybe when you were vulnerable, when you were open, what would happen, right? Maybe you'd be rejected somehow, shamed, made fun of, and humiliated. And those experiences teach us something, right? They teach us it's not okay to be myself. It's not okay to just be authentic and express myself and say whatever I feel like it. We learn the opposite, that I have to be a certain way. I have to be polite, maybe, nice, smart, useful, um, whatever that is, right? However you learned. And especially, I think strong can be a big one. Like, I have to be strong. For people who have a lot of fear of vulnerability, there's often a deficiency of weak. And by deficiency, I mean a sense of something's wrong with me that I have to protect and strive to prevent. And so, if being strong to you feels important, then that's a fear of vulnerability. But it's essentially, I mean, everyone has this really. And essentially, if you feel into what is this protecting me from? Like, what if I am vulnerable? What could happen? And just see what words feel right for you. But oftentimes, rejection, shamed, hurt come up. And if you just kind of stay with those words and just kind of see how they connect to vulnerability, because that's what it's really about, right? It's not just, oh, I don't want to be vulnerable and that's it. No, it's, I don't want to be vulnerable because something bad could happen. So, what is that something bad? And so, just naming these fears, just naming, like, what is it? What's the worst thing that could happen if I am vulnerable? That starts to open the door to understanding what that fear is trying to protect you from. And maybe it's just as simple as rejection, hurt, or it could go even deeper to fear of being alone, abandoned. Now, naming those is important, but also noticing resistance is important. Just because this is deep stuff, and you're going to start to feel resistance, like, oh, I don't want that. I don't want that. And the whole point is to allow that resistance. That's how you resolve the fear, is to let yourself not like it. Let yourself connect with the part of you that's like, I don't want that. I don't want rejection. I don't want hurt. Or I don't want to be alone. I don't, whatever that is. If you can stay with that in words and allow it, the fear of vulnerability is going to start to clear up, because it's really about whatever that is, rejection, hurt. And you can go even deeper than that. Like, let's say if it's hurt or rejection, well, what's the worst that could happen then if I'm hurt and rejected? And probably at some point you're going to connect to unsafe. Once you can connect to, yeah, I'll be unsafe, that's when it's going to start to really make sense why you have to protect from that. Because vulnerability is not safe, right? You could be hurt. You could be rejected. You could be made fun of. But notice how the reason why I don't like the reason why I don't like rejection, the reason why I don't like hurt and being alone too, is it's not safe. And I want to be safe, right? That's really what the fear is saying, is I want to be safe, and here's what I can do. Protect myself. I have to be strong, not vulnerable. But if you go with just the roots of it, which is, well, I just want to be safe. I don't want to be unsafe. And what if you just stay there? Like, oh, I just don't want to be vulnerable because I want to be safe. And just allowing that part of you, allowing yourself to need safety, right? Because you're a human being. Of course, you're going to want safety and need that. Now, if this is bringing up resistance for you, stop and look at that. What is this resistance that's coming up here? Because there could be resistance to needing safety. Like, maybe it's like, no, I don't need that. I don't want that. I shouldn't need that. Because then that means I'm weak, maybe, or something, right? So just stay open to any resistance that comes up here, especially when it comes to having needs. Because oftentimes the fear of vulnerability will lead to repressing the fact that you have needs, the fact that you need to be safe, the fact that you have even emotions and fear and all that, right? So just recognizing all of this is very valuable. Naming the fears, seeing how it connects with safety, allowing any resistance that's like, I don't want this. I really just want to be safe. Or maybe accepted, right? Because what's the opposite of rejected? Like, if you're vulnerable and you're hurt, right? What's the opposite of being hurt and rejected? Well, maybe loved and accepted. Oh, is that what I really want? Is love and acceptance. And that's why I don't want to be vulnerable. Because if you don't have love and acceptance as a child, especially, right? If you're hurt somehow by those close to you, it could be unknowingly, it doesn't have to be on purpose. But we're often hurt, we feel unsafe, but then we repress that. We hide it. Because you're not supposed to be vulnerable, right? So then we just pretend that everything's okay. And I don't need anything. I don't need help. I don't need anybody. But really, there's just a protection at play there, a sense of protection, a sense of pushing away. Why? Because that's what gives me safety, right? So kind of seeing the patterns in this way and kind of how they connect with safety and acceptance, love, right? It could be anything. Trust what comes up for you. It could be appreciation, validation, love, safety. And you're trusting your body to kind of tell you if these words connect or not. And what you're doing here is you're just exploring this fear. You're not trying to change anything. You're not trying to fix anything. You're not trying to convince yourself that everything's okay. That's not what you want to do here. You want to listen to the fear, see what it's trying to protect you from, and allow that. Because that's how the whole thing starts to dissolve, is when we can understand, oh, that makes sense. That totally makes sense. And no wonder, right? No wonder. So, so the fear of vulnerability, right? Very, very common. And this starts to connect with all sorts of things, right? This starts to connect with the need for validation, the need for approval all the time, like needing approval from people all the time. And once you can sort of see how this connects really with safety, actually, that we seek approval for safety because as humans, we're really conditioned to need approval from the group, from the tribe. And it kind of makes sense if you think about it evolutionarily, right? Because if humans didn't care about this kind of stuff, maybe we'd all be living in caves. So it's kind of pretty normal, right, for a social being, social creature to care about fitting in, right? Especially for safety reasons. Because if you're out on your own having to survive in the wilderness, that's not a safe situation to be in. Now, the reality of that may not have actually been there for you in childhood, but that doesn't mean that you didn't have the fear, right? We all have this fear of being alone, being rejected, because that's what connects with safety. And we never talk about this, though. We never acknowledge it, so it just stays buried within us. We just pretend like we don't have this fear. We pretend like, I don't care what people think of me. I can be alone all the time. And maybe you've really convinced yourself of that, just like I did for many years. But once you start to kind of look underneath the surface, go deeper, just don't be surprised that this fear will come up. And it's quite normal, very normal. I would say if a human doesn't have this, something's probably off. But honestly, I've never met anybody who doesn't have this. It's just often trauma and conditioning that kind of buries it. So, yeah. And just recognizing this fear as it comes up for you, however it comes up, it's often going to be triggered in relationships, right? And noticing it, oh, is that what this is? Is this like that I don't want to be rejected, that fear of vulnerability, rejection? Oh, that's what this is. See, you're feeling in and you're allowing, but you have to recognize it first, right? So you can't allow what you can't feel or you don't know. You can't really allow it, right? So first you have to connect with it, recognize it. Now you're allowing it. And when you do that, you're supporting yourself really in a way that nobody else can do for you. And just see what happens to that fear of rejection and vulnerability. See what happens as you support yourself and acknowledge the fear without changing it. See what happens. Stay curious.